Welcome to the American Grown Podcast, hosted by Austin Sullivan. The American Grown Podcast will focus on people from different walks of life and their journey to where they are now. Now, turn up your volume and settle in for a great episode.
Hi, I'm Austin Sullivan. This is the American Grown Podcast, recorded inside the Colortech Creative Solutions studios. Today, we have Fred Long, attorney at Long, Brightbill, Attorneys at Law. He specializes in estate planning, business formation, real estate transactions. Fred, welcome to episode 27 of the American Grown Podcast.
Thanks, Austin. Thanks for having me.
You were probably, I was just thinking about this the other day, you're probably like the top 5 listeners. You know, I got my mom to the podcast. I have one of my good buddies, and then from what I hear, you're like an avid listener.
I love it. Yeah. I think I've listened to every episode, and I love what you do. I think we talked about a little bit before we got started that one of the things that I think you and I have in common is just an interest in other people and listening to their stories. And so I love it.
Oh, I appreciate the support and the listens, because it's kind of like a side project, you know, and like you said, we've talked quite a bit about it over the phone and through emails. I think last year sometime over the fall maybe, or maybe even last summer, you had reached out. I think it was. So,
yeah.
You know, it seems like it's been forever, but to finally get you on and get you here, I'm excited. So for all the listeners, what was it like growing up here in Lebanon County? I think, you know, your family's been in Lebanon County for quite some time.
Yeah. I believe that I am a 6th or 7th generation Lebanon Countyan. Growing up here was amazing. I'm the youngest of 4 children. My parents are both really like awesome, genuinely good people. They're both examples to me of hard work, people who really care about the work that they put into the world, but also prioritize family. My mom was a teacher. She started teaching, I believe, 4th or 5th grade. And did you say you went to Kutztown?
Yeah.
My mom went to Kutztown.
No way. Oh, wow.
And when she took some time off to raise her children, and then because I'm the youngest, when I went to kindergarten, she went back into teaching and finished out her career teaching ESL, English as a second language, and also teaching children with special needs. And she worked for the rest of her career, retired, I think, 3 years ago. My dad is an attorney. He's my partner, or one of my partners. He spent, I think, the first 16 years of his career in public service. He was an assistant district attorney and then was the district attorney in Lebanon County for 4 years. And that was at a time when that position was part-time. So during the time that he was working in the DA's office, he was also building a private practice. So he is, again, an example of somebody who works really hard, but all the while he was my baseball coach, he was my assistant soccer coach. He and my mom would drive 45 minutes both ways for me to play ice hockey and travel soccer and sports tournaments on the weekends. And so, again, just an example of somebody who
Sounds like a great dad.
Yeah.
And he had a lot on his plate, but yet he still prioritized, you know, family. So shout out to Mr. Long if you're listening. Awesome job. Keep it up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And not only for me too, for my 3 siblings as well. We were all pretty active kids and they were very involved.
So being the youngest, do you ever feel like you had to better your siblings?
No, actually, it was kind of nice because I just kind of got to fly under the radar, which is exactly where I wanted to be.
Okay.
Definitely have a really good relationship with all 3 of my siblings, but definitely was happy to kind of sit back and learn from them, but not necessarily in a competitive way.
Not competitive like that. All right, gotcha.
Maybe a little bit with my brother, but
yeah.
I have 2 older sisters too.
Okay, and just curious, what does your brother do?
He's a realtor.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's a lot of a lot of real estate in my family. My dad is a real estate lawyer. My brother's a realtor. My sister is a real estate broker. So that's something that we talk about at Thanksgiving
I
and
bet.
Christmas dinners.
Some interesting conversations. Now, are they all in Lebanon County or?
A little bit spread out. My brother lives in Lebanon. He's married. He has 3 kids, 2 twin 2-year-olds. So he's got his hands full.
Wow.
But he also really hard worker. My sister Katie lives in Fort Worth, Texas, and my oldest sister Tori lives in Truckee, California. So a little bit spread out, but I was just with my sister last week in South Carolina, my sister Katie, and my older sister's flying into Harrisburg tonight. So we still...
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and credit to them, I think more than myself, they really make an effort to get home
and keep in touch like that, even though you're kind of spread out a little bit, having kids and your family's growing up together, to still be in touch like that is great.
Yeah, it's important for my parents. My mom, so between the 4 of us, there are 9 grandkids. So for my parents, I think it's pretty awesome to be able to spend so much time with all of them.
That's really cool. What high school was it? Lebanon, Cedar Crest, or were you guys more Anvil, Elko?
Cedar Crest. Started in Lebanon. I grew up. The first 4 years, I grew up on Oak Street, and that was in Lebanon School District. So my brother and my sisters went to Southwest Elementary School in Lebanon School District, and then we moved to Cedar Crest School District when I was 4 or 5 in roughly 1990. And so where we moved, it was kind of like right down the street, probably... I would exaggerate if I said that I could throw a football this far, but my grandparents lived right down the street.
Okay.
And one set of my mom's parents lived right down the street, and then my dad's parents lived maybe a mile down the road. So one of the things that I'm probably most grateful for in my childhood is having an opportunity to grow up with my 4 grandparents. They were really active in my life. Again, examples of people who really worked hard and really care about what they did, but also prioritize family. My grandfather, who I'm named after, his name is was Fred Shay. He was a pilot, and he flew B-25 and B-26 bomber pilots in Europe in World War II.
So like legit pilot, not just like he owned it and did it on the weekends kind of thing. Yeah.
Later in life, he did. He ended up after the war. He worked at the Reading Airport, and then he formed Lancaster Aviation, which I don't know that it's still around with the same name. Mm-hmm. But I'm pretty sure that I know the Lancaster Airport's still there. I think it's in Lidditz.
Lidditz, yeah.
So he flew B-25, B-26, and then in Europe, and then flew an A-26, a Douglas A-26 in the Pacific. Combined, he flew 87 bombing missions.
Wow.
So statistically, the likelihood that he survived was pretty low. So that's something that I kind of think back on, and like, not only for me, but if you think about all of the things in life that have to happen for us to be here, it's pretty incredible.
You're right. I heard a saying, everything that's happened in the past has led up to this moment right here, to this second, to this sentence. And it is kind of crazy when you say it like that, because had something happened to him during one of those missions, it'd be a completely different story.
Totally different.
Totally.
I wouldn't be here.
Probably wouldn't be here.
My mom wouldn't be here. She was born after the war. So my 3 siblings, her 9 grandchildren. And I'll tell you a story about him. So anybody who knew him would describe him as a character. After Europe, he volunteered to go back to the Pacific, and he always claimed that the reason he did that is because the military had just released the Douglas A-26 bomber plane, which was a purpose-built, lightweight bomber and ground attack plane. Yeah. And he claimed that he wanted to fly the fastest bombing plane in the world.
Oh, wow.
So he was back in the United States in South Carolina training on the A-26. And the day before he left to go to the Pacific, the plan was to fly from South Carolina to California to Hawaii, and then they were going to island hop to Okinawa in Japan, where he was eventually stationed. So the day before he left, he was on a training mission and flew to Lebanon. And when he got here, lined up Lehman Street on one end and did a low fly just above tree level from one end of Lehman Street to the other. And then flew back to South Carolina, called his parents and said, hey, just checking in, leaving tomorrow. Anything interesting going on in Lebanon? And they said, this plane flew by really low, and people were kind of freaking out. They thought we were under attack. Yeah. And he said, well, I'm sorry to scare you. That was me. And apparently his dad didn't believe him because he didn't think that it would be possible for him to get all the way back to South Carolina.
The technology and to be able to fly that fast and everything.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so
my grandfather's a badass.
Yeah,
he's an awesome guy. Seriously.
Yeah. And my grandmother, who's his wife, Pat Shay, who's still alive. She's 97 years old. Lives on her
that's
own.
Great. 97 years old.
And she's sharp. She had
awesome.
Didn't always have an easy life, but I really try to see her. We usually get together. She comes to my parents' house for Sunday dinners, and I try to get to see her at her house every now and then. And she's got the best sense of humor.
Yeah. What do you think the key is to that? I mean, to be 97, to have a sharp memory, to live on your own, what'd she do right?
I think when I think back on my grandparents, and it's like one of those things where I always struggled with trying to fill their shoes or try to live up to what they did and what their expectations of me were. But in reality, they just viewed me as their grandson and somebody who they loved. And I think for them, a lot of it was about finding meaning in what they do in their life, and whether that's through service or through their normal everyday job or volunteer work. I think if I could pinpoint one thing, that's something that they all had in common. And maybe a lot of it has to do with family too. Just keep going, because my grandma still gets to hang out with her grandchildren or great grandchildren.
Yeah.
And see them grow up.
I think finding meaning has a lot to do with it, because if you're not happy with what you're doing in life, or you're not fulfilled with what you're doing, you may turn to other things, over drinking, smoking, things that could really affect your health. And again, maybe I'm thinking too much into this, but to be 97, living on your own, and like you said, to see your great grandchildren like that, I think that's phenomenal.
Yeah, and I think, no, I don't think you're thinking too much. I think it's exactly right. I also think that generation didn't even really have to think about it as much as we do now. We live a really comfortable life now, and I think that's probably something that we struggle with more than they did. It was like, for them, this is just what they had to do.
Oh, I agree.
They didn't have a choice. It's not like, got an opportunity to sit back and think about what they could do with their lives that would have the biggest impact. It was just, that's what they were called upon to do.
Their mothers or their grandfathers were in this business, and they continued it. And nowadays there's a lot of things, TikTok, and caught up watching football all Sunday, whatever it is. Back then, that generation, they didn't, what do I want to say?
They didn't have the comfort, I think. They didn't have the
comfort, yes.
The space to
maybe I shouldn't say nonsense, but really it is when I think about it.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
That's a great way to put it. It is a challenge. In some cases, it's necessary to grow a business or to push a service, but
it's easy to let it go beyond that, though. Yeah. You can go into it with good intentions. I was off of social media for probably about 6 or 7 years, and then thought, you know what? I thought that I could rejoin and use it for business purposes, but it's easy to get sucked back into, it's purposefully designed that way too.
Right.
And it's like, one thing I learned is I'm not smarter than the tech gurus that work for social media companies. So if I put my eyes on that screen, they're gonna grab me.
Yeah, with their algorithms and all that. Let's circle back. In high school, we were talking a little bit before we pressed record here. We actually had the same teacher, Steve Miller, Mr. Miller, at Cedar Crest.
Yeah.
I had him for, it was like the graphic arts, and you had him for, I think you were saying maybe some photography, but also for arts outside of that. Yeah.
So when I was in 9th grade, I took a photography course. I think when I was there, they had photography 1, photography 2. So photography 1 was the first time that I had any introduction to 35 millimeter film. It was really cool because they taught you how to use the camera, and then there was like a process where you had to pull out the film, but it couldn't be exposed to light.
Yep.
And then you would process it in the dark room. So there was this like, almost like when you're going into a hotel, you're going through the revolving door.
Yeah.
It was like that, but it was all blacked out. So on one end is the classroom. You go into this dark revolving door, and then on the other end, you end up in the dark room. And using chemicals to expose the film to light, but not too much light. So that was just kind of like a really cool thing to me when you're in high school and you're learning about all these things that, frankly, I wasn't really that interested in. But then to have something that was kind of more hands-on. So then I ended up taking photography 2 with Mr. Miller, and then I took 2 independent study courses for photography with him as well. So that became a real passion for me, and I loved it. And it was something that I really wanted to do professionally, but obviously that didn't pan out that way.
Yeah. The reason I brought that up, because this is the first time I've ever met you. Even though I've lived in Lebanon all my life, you've been here for many generations, your family, so it's a small world. And when you mentioned Mr. Miller and photography in the dark room, I remember that. Now, you graduated Cedar Crest 2004 or 5?
2004. Yeah.
Okay. And I graduated 2011. Like to hear that you went through a similar experience that I did with that dark room. Because I remember, like you said, the revolving door, you'd go in and it was all red light, for the listeners out there, because now everything's digital. I don't even know if they teach film anymore in school.
Yeah, I don't think they do.
I doubt it.
I don't know why they would, I guess, right?
Yeah, I guess that's true. It is kind of a dying art or skill, but
I don't even I tried to buy a camera, and this was like 15 years ago, a 35 millimeter camera, and I couldn't find one.
Yeah,
I know they still make the film, but I think it's hard to find.
It's very hard to find. Yeah, they still sell the film, but and of course the prices of that are up because it's such a rare thing. But for all the listeners out there, it wasn't just pull out your iPhone or pull out your camera and perfect exposure, perfect lighting, and you just took a bunch of pictures. It was a whole nother thing. So I just thought that was a real neat experience that we both had.
I'll say one more thing about Mr. Miller. And I'll never forget this advice. He said, and I think this actually applies now, even though everything's digital. He said that I think a 35 millimeter roll, standard roll, would have like 30 or 40 pictures maybe. And he used to tell us that if you would get one good picture out of an entire roll, then you're good to go. And that stuck with me, and I still think about that. Like when I take pictures, a family or whatever, you can try as much, and this more than way more than I do, but you can try to get the right lighting, the right moment. But the best practice is just to take a whole lot of pictures, because you're going to increase the chances that you have a good one.
That you catch a good one. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And what Fred is referencing, for those that don't know, the American Grown Podcast, the studio's inside of Colortech Creative Solutions, which has a division called Blue Cardinal Photography, and that's our local sports photography. We do headshots, product photography, and all that stuff, video, drones. And back when I was in high school in 2011, I was in the newspaper, The Talon, and that's kind of where I started dabbling in sports photography. And then from there, here at the family business, and actually we did some freelancing on my own and got to shoot at Madison Square Garden, Lincoln Financial Field, and so forth. But needless to say, yeah.
Do you mind if I ask,
Please, yeah.
What was the opportunity that you had at Madison Square Garden and Lincoln Financial?
Yeah, so Lincoln Financial was myself just reaching out to athletic directors, Temple University. I would just email them some of my photos of local, sports shots that I got here, maybe a Cedar Bowl or Palmyra ice hockey, something like that. And yeah, they actually agreed. They pay me a certain amount, and I would go there and photograph football, send them all the pictures, and I would get paid. So that's how I got to
awesome.
Lincoln Financial Field. Yeah, the one at Madison Square Garden is my father-in-law. Shout out John Garloff. He's another listener, and I greatly appreciate that. He's the one that turned me on to bourbon. Before John, I don't think I drank at all. But with that, I actually went to Madison Square Garden to photograph Louisville. Their men's basketball was
That's
playing.
awesome.
So yeah, it was.
Were you on the floor?
I was. Oh yeah, I was right there on the floor. Now that one I didn't get paid for, but again, that's fine. It was the experience, you know. So that was like, gosh, 2015, 16, maybe even 2017 a little bit. But from there, you know, you get caught up in other things. The business here at Colortech is growing. I'm more involved with it than I was back then. So for you, Fred, you know, it was college and then law school. Was that always in the plans for you?
College, pretty much. That was kind of the direction. Like my parents they never really pushed me to do anything in particular. But I think at that time in the early 2000s, that was like the path for most people. And I don't want to digress too much, but I think there was a lot of opportunity outside of going to college that I hadn't really considered at the time. Going to a trade school or learning at Votech and going into a trade, I think and fast forward from 2004 to when I graduated from college in 2008, there was a recession and it was really hard to get a professional job. And so kids that I was in high school with that went into trade, they were pretty well set up. They didn't have college debt. They had a 4-year head start on working. And so I'm 100% grateful. There's no doubt whatsoever that this turned out to be the right path for me. I went to college in 2004. I graduated from Susquehanna University in 2008. At that time, I was in college. I kind of struggled with what I wanted to do. I think a lot of kids do, but I struggled with what I wanted to do with my life. At the time, I was majoring in journalism. Okay. And what we had talked about before, photography and journalism, I had this idea that I wanted to be a photojournalist. Oh, yeah. And I loved writing. I loved photography. And so the two things combined seemed to be a pretty good fit. At the same time, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was going on, and I had this kind of grandiose idea that I was going to go and be involved in that way.
My mind went right there. I was like, you could have been a photojournalist, like on the front lines. I was literally just thinking that as you say it. So
at that time, that was kind of a real possibility. I thought about going to the service. I talked to my grandfather, who I mentioned earlier, about his opinion, and he kind of dissuaded me a little bit. You know, it was a different war than what he was involved in. So there were a couple factors that led me to law school from college. One was the economy. So the year that I was graduating in 2008 was the start of the recession. And at that time, people who had 30-year careers, decades-long careers, were being laid off.
Right.
And there weren't many jobs available for people coming out of college at that time. Another factor, more importantly, was I met my now wife. We were dating for about 1.5 years. She went to Susquehanna University as well. And I have to give a shout out to her because when we met, I didn't have my act together at all.
No?
No. And she did. She always had. Really super responsible, very mature, and I knew that I really liked her, and if we were going to hang out together, that she probably wouldn't like I was going down a bad path. So I kind of got my act together for her, and she grew up in York County, Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah. So close to home.
So her family's still there. Had a similar upbringing than I did. Her grandparents were really active in her life. And so I figured that if we were going to end up together, then there was a pretty high probability that we would stay somewhat local. If I hadn't met her, the truth is I probably would be living in like Colorado or somewhere in the mountains. And I'm glad that we met.
It worked out.
It really did.
So when you say you had to get your act together, in college, were you kind of like a bad boy partier, or what were you like back then?
I wasn't bad. I think I always had a really strong moral compass, which I credit to my parents.
Right. Okay.
But just getting into trouble, like partying, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's good you realized and like, hey, I got to get with it,
Well,
Yeah.
I think she made me realize it, and
Okay.
that's why I give her a
Yeah.
lot of credit, and maybe it was just meant to be, but it was kind of a turning point, maybe one of the early turning points in my life. So because it was kind of, the writing was on the wall that if we were going to stay together, then we would probably end up here working as an attorney. My dad, we have a small law firm, so I figured that was like a safe harbor.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a decision that was maybe in part risk aversion, security, job security.
Oh yeah. With all the uncertainty going on at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Smart move.
I took a year off. So I kind of made that decision to go to law school the last semester in college, and I took a year off between college and law school. And you and I were talking before we got started about your relationship with your grandfather and
Yeah.
being able to hang out with him and spend time with him, and how meaningful that is to
Definitely.
you.
Mm-hmm.
And during that year that I was off, I had that opportunity with my grandfather, not Fred, my grandfather that I shared with you earlier, but my other grandfather. His name was Ted Long. He was an ophthalmologist in Lebanon, super bright. He had a photographic memory, so he was just like the sharpest person I think I ever met in my life. He went to Lebanon Valley College and then got a full scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, did his residency at Wills Eye Hospital in Philadelphia, which at that time, that would have been late 30s, early 40s, was the top ranked eye hospital in the country. And I think it's still like number 1 or number 2. So he did his residency in Philadelphia and then came back to Lebanon. And for a really long time, I think he was the only ophthalmologist in Lebanon County. He was like the king of moderation. So talking about your love of bourbon, he would drink Canadian whiskey, but he always told me that his routine was to have 2 fingers of whiskey after dinner.
Okay.
Unless he had surgery the next day, then he would only have 1.
Yes.
Because it would make his hands a little shaky.
Oh, that's awesome.
But he was like a really wise man with a really kind heart. And I'll tell you a story about him. So that year that I was hanging out with him, I would take him grocery shopping, take him to his doctor's appointments. Just we spent a lot of time together. He was 96 when he died. Wow. And as he was actively dying, leading up to that, 3 days before he passed away, I was with him, and he told me this story about, he was on a hospital ship in World War II, and on the USS Refuge, and they brought back the first troops from Normandy, from D-Day. And as he's telling me the story, he told me the date that they landed in Newport News, Virginia, the number of patients that were on board, the number of patients that had eye injuries, the number of doctors that were on board, the number of nurses that were on board. So that's how sharp he was, leading up to the day that he passed away. And then a side story to this, my mom is a history buff, and she's also really into ancestry. So in like the early days of the internet, she really figured out how to use the internet to find out information about her family, our family, and then interesting tidbits about the war and other history, anything that she was really interested in. So we never had a photograph of the ship, the hospital ship that my grandfather was on. So she put, I don't know what you would call it, but on eBay, like a request or something, so that if anything would ever pop up, she would get a notification. The day that my grandfather died, she got an email or an eBay notification that a photograph of his hospital ship was available. So she purchased it. So it's actually one of the things that I brought in.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
I'll show
please.
you.
Yes. That's crazy. So the day that he passed, this notification came up. So your mom, she was Ancestry.com before there was Ancestry.com.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So that picture is the hospital ship coming in to harbor to Newport News, Virginia. I think it was June 29th, 1945.
Wow.
The story that he was telling me about 3 days before. That's what he was telling. That's the story that he was telling me.
Wow.
So
what are the odds?
So when I was looking into this a little bit, and there was a part of this story that I forgot about until yesterday when I went over to my parents' house to grab that photo because I wanted to bring it in to show you.
Yeah.
So he had this little
I saw that when
tiny
you brought it.
book.
Yeah.
And what this is, it's an address book. Here, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay.
So for people who are listening, it's like 3 inches by 2 inches. It's a really tiny address
small.
book.
Yeah.
And they weren't allowed to keep a journal. So he would write notes in this little book about all the places that that the ship went. Somebody from my family transcribed all the entries because you can tell they're tiny and they're in cursive and they're hard to read.
Yeah.
So as I was looking through this yesterday, I found this entry from the date, and I'm sorry, I think I said June 29th. It was July 29, 1944. There was an entry in his book that says, arrived Norfolk at 10 a.m., unloaded 108 Army patients at Newport News, balance at Norfolk. Received letter from Velma, who's my grandmother, his wife, hinting that son was born July 8th. Verified fact on telephoning to Velma. Mother, son, and daughter fine. Hoorah. Request for leave refused.
Oh.
So then it details, then he went back overseas for another year after that.
That is amazing, and that you have this. I mean, this is history, not only your family history, but American history, and to have that write-up, it's a shame they denied him leave, but wow, like, what are the odds that this would all come together, the eBay notification and everything? Yeah. That's kind of mind-blowing,
It's
really.
it's a cool story. And then my grandmother, and even though leave was requested, I can tell you that anybody that knew her would say that she was doing just fine.
Yeah.
She was a tough woman. She was kind of our family protector. She was tough, but she would do anything for her family.
Yeah.
And I think about them a lot, and how fortunate I am to have been so close to them, and to actually really have an opportunity to know them, and not just looking back on the photographs and the things that they did, but actually having a meaningful opportunity. And that's why I think it's so cool that you have that relationship with your grandfather. And I wish that for everybody. Now, obviously, I'm sure there are people that have good reason for not having close relationships with their family. But if you have that opportunity, it's definitely something that's worth taking advantage of.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. It's time that you won't get back. So for the listeners out there, I know some are younger, high school, college age. Definitely appreciate your grandparents if they're still around. Spend time with them. Try to learn as much as you can about their life and what they know, because once they're not here, you lose that. You lose that knowledge. You lose that information. So it's definitely, I think, a blessing for you that you got to spend that time with your grandfather Ted, and for myself and my grandfather Pat. He's a bit of a nut, but we love him, and my dad would tell you the same thing. They broke the mold when they made my grandfather, but I've learned a lot from him. So yeah, this is really neat, Fred. So it sounds to me like Ted Long, your grandfather, was one of your mentors. Did you have any others that also left an impact?
I think outside of my family, when I went to law school, it was either the summer after my first year in law school, I started an internship at the Lebanon County District Attorney's Office. And then I ended up kind of similar to photography. I liked it so much that I went back, and I think I did like 3 or 4 internships over the course of the 3 years that I was in law school. And then when I graduated from law school, I worked as an assistant district attorney in the Lebanon County District Attorney's Office for about a year and a half. The district attorney at that time was Dave Arnold, who has since passed away, but he and everybody in that office were real mentors to me. They taught me the value of preparation and hard work. They taught me how to be a trial lawyer, and they really laid the foundation for who I am and how I approach the practice of law. I look back on that time as being invaluable because I was getting courtroom experience. I was really fortunate to be able to do some trial work, jury trials, bench trials, which is a trial just without a jury in front of a judge. A lot of different, basically you're in court 3-4 days a week. And in order to do that effectively, there's the right way to do it and the wrong way to do it. And they taught me the right way to do it. And without their influence, I think it would have been really hard. And I think it probably is really hard for lawyers who don't have that level of mentorship to feel comfortable in the courtroom. So really grateful. And again, it wasn't just Dave Arnold. It was everybody else in that office went way above and beyond to take time to teach. And so I really am grateful for them.
Yeah. How did Long, Brightbill, and Attorneys at Law, how'd that come about?
The firm has been in continuous existence since 1902 and has changed names over the course of years as the partners retired or eventually passed away. So when I started practicing 2012, about 11 years ago, the firm was Sechrist, Kohler, Brightbill, Long, and Feeman. So it's kind of a mouthful.
Yeah.
And in 2014, we decided to condense it a little bit to Long Brightbill. So since 2014, the firm has been called Long Brightbill. And so we have 5 attorneys, 5 staff, and I am extremely grateful to be there, to work with the people that I work with.
Let's go over some of the services that you offer there for the listeners, especially a lot of our listeners are here in Lebanon County, and maybe they're not familiar with yourself or, the law firm.
Yeah, so I do primarily estate planning, business law, and real estate. And those practice areas have kind of evolved over the course of my career. But I'm really grateful to be able to have narrowed the focus of my practice to those 3 areas. So with estate planning, and this is something I'd love to get into more, that's when you draft wills, power of attorney, trusts, living wills, some people call them advanced medical directives, talking about beneficiary designations on life insurance and retirement accounts and things like that, making sure that we have a cohesive plan to manage someone's legal affairs, financial affairs, medical affairs in the event that they become incapacitated or pass away. So that's probably of the 3 practice areas that business law is something that is more of an interest. It's always been an interest for me. And we talked about being involved in a small business. I really like working with business people, and real estate, because I think of the family dynamic, has always been... It's been
in your life and a forefront in your life. Before we get into what separates you from your competitors, maybe let's do a deeper dive into estate planning. It's something new that I guess I never really thought about. I didn't even know it was much of a thing. I knew there was a will and things like that, but loved to know more, because I think on the form you had mentioned, like cryptocurrencies too, and NFTs, and being able to access your social media, for lack of a better term, assets. Maybe that's what I'm looking for. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. And I love talking about this. So this really, estate planning for me, and I don't want to go too far overboard on this, but we had talked about the importance of finding meaning in the work that you do.
Yep.
And I think it's worthwhile exploring how I got here. I spent the first 4, 5, 6 years of my career doing a lot of different things, a little bit of a lot of different things. There was and still is, and always probably unfortunately will be, a need for people who are navigating the criminal justice system and family law. So I was doing a lot of family law work, and then after I left the district attorney's office, I was doing criminal defense. And I felt naively that there was an opportunity, and I think that, and I hope that there was some impact, but I felt like there was an opportunity to really help people who were going through those experiences in life. And I felt like I had a prescription that I could help them, do the right thing to kind of get their life back on track. And I ended up getting burnt out by it. What I found is that very often, I don't want to paint these folks with a broad brush, but very often what I found is that people who need lawyers to go through the family law system or the criminal justice system, that they don't have legal problems, that they have life problems.
Okay.
That manifest in the form of a legal problem.
Yeah.
And
makes sense.
while I could help them with their legal problem, it's not really what they need. What they need is somebody to help them with their life issues. I could help them with their legal problem, but then they would come back. And while that might be good for business, it wasn't good for morale, because that's not why I did it.
Right.
So I actually went through a pretty difficult period about 5 years ago where I wasn't sure that I wanted to be a lawyer anymore. And I obviously had no idea what I would do with my life. I would say it lasted about 3 or 4 months. And toward the end of it, I kind of sat back and really focused on what about the work I do that I actually enjoy, or that I might be able to find meaning in.
Yeah, for sure.
And so one of my favorite things to do is to sit with people while we're talking about death and contemplating death, or working with people, collaborating with people who may have just lost a loved one. And so, Austin, the stories that I shared with you about my family, those aren't unique to me. Everybody has a story. And I think if you give them space to tell that story, they will talk to you about the most amazing things. And I find that when we're talking about, and it sounds kind of silly maybe, but talking about estate planning, but we are really talking about the end, or some serious illness, incapacity, death.
Right. It's a little grim of a subject, but yet it's one that, in my view, that if you talk about it and plan for it, it doesn't have to be, I don't want to say maybe as tough in the moment. If you're prepared for the worst case scenario, then when that does happen, you know what I mean? You'll be better off.
You are
What'd you say?
100% spot on.
I nailed it. Okay.
You absolutely nailed it.
All right. I was worried. I'm like, I'm getting in a little deeper. I don't know.
No,
Yeah. Okay.
you nailed it. And that's where I think that I can find meaning in the work that I do, because there's a practical side, which we talked about. So drafting the documents, planning, you're helping financial planning, the ease of administration of an estate when someone passes away, their tax planning, cost savings, time savings. There are practical solutions that I'm trained to manage. But to your point, and I think where the impact really may live is the psychological component of estate planning. So it alleviates the stress surrounding your financial affairs, how they'll be handled when you become incapacitated, or if you become incapacitated, or upon death. It alleviates a stress that would otherwise be imposed on your loved ones who are going through a very difficult time in their lives.
Right.
And I think what is really special, if it's done right, is it gives space to honor the life of your loved ones by freeing up energy that is otherwise used up for problem solving that may be created from a lack of planning. Yeah, I think that's where I really feel like I can make a difference for people.
Yeah, and you had mentioned on the form you really wanted to find meaning in life, but also find that balance in life. And I feel like it kind of ties into what we're just talking about, that you found meaning in helping others prepare for, I mean, let's be honest, probably it's a fact of life. Everyone's got to face it, but it can be grim, and there can be things that you don't think about that come up, maybe fights amongst the family all of a sudden. And what do you go by, if it's not prepared ahead of time?
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I can't say that careful planning can prevent that from happening 100% of the time, but it can absolutely reduce significantly the likelihood that you'll run into those problems.
That's huge.
It's huge because it's honestly, it's the worst thing to see is when there's a loss of a loved one, and then instead of taking the right time to grieve the loss of the loved one, all that's going on is trying to figure out what to do, or to your point, maybe there's fighting among the family.
Right.
Things are not planned out. No one knows where anything is, where the bank accounts are, whether there's any credit card debt or medical debt that needs to be taken care of. Things can be chaotic.
So how do you, as someone that handles this day in and day out, how do you find a balance in your life with that?
So that probably is, aside from the professional motivation, is the personal motivation for me. It starts off with the idea that my goal is to be the best father that I can be, the best husband that I can be, the best mentor, the best community member, the best friend that I can be. But I know that in order for those things to be true, I have to find the right balance in my life to be able to focus on my professional life and also attend to what is equally important, or actually more important, my family and my community. And so that was a work in progress. And I would say I really only started focusing on that about 5 or 6 years ago. I used to be the kind of person that I would wake up in the morning, I would drag myself out of bed, I would fill up my coffee mug, get in the shower, and then go to work. And when I would show up at work, I was not the person that I wanted to be. For me, that starts with a foundation. The balance starts with building the right foundation. And I think that foundation has to be balanced. So for me, it's equal parts sleep, diet, proper nutrition, exercise, and spiritual and mental health. And so I have a routine that I do pretty much every morning. I would say at least 5 mornings, sometimes 6 mornings a week, where instead of waking up, running to the coffee machine, getting in the shower, and going to work, I try to start my day off a little bit more intentionally. And so I'll pour a cup of coffee, I read a passage from the Bible, I'll do a journal entry, and the journal entry might be, and I've been doing this for 5 years, so I have each year separated.
Oh, really?
So it's kind of cool to be able to go back, and what I write is anything that's kind of floating in my mind, anything I'm working on, or an idea, or a quote that I heard that might be motivational or inspirational. And if I can't think of anything to write, then I do a gratefulness practice. So I write 3 things that I'm grateful for that day. And it could be something really minor, like my morning coffee, or feeling healthy, or the sun shining, or something like that. And then I do about 10 or 15 minutes of meditation and like some stretching, or just trying to loosen up a little
Listening
bit.
to the American Grown podcast.
Yeah, 100%. Usually that's on the
What
car,
is that? Okay,
on
the
the
car
way
ride?
to work.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah.
And so I think like that last component for me, that is the spiritual mental health. For me, that's like a practice of my faith in a way. And I view my faith, to me, isn't an identity. I think that we are all way too complicated to fit neatly within the boxes that we often put ourselves into, or the boxes that other people want to put us into.
Right.
So for me, my faith is a practice. It's not about who I am. It's about who I want to become. And so it's an ongoing, hopefully every day. I'm not perfect. Some days I miss it. And then some days maybe I don't get through each of those things. But then it's also about carrying that with me throughout the day and setting up the right intention early in the day, and then trying to carry that with me throughout my day, throughout my personal interactions. Again, I don't pretend that this was like obviously it's been a 5-year thing for me, and I'm still working on it a lot, and I'm very, very far from being perfect. Anyone who works with me will tell you that I come in some days and I might be a little bit of a bear, or I might be frustrated about something.
Right. Oh yeah, it happens to everybody, but it's bettering yourself, each day, even if it's a little bit. And there's a clip that went around, I think it's still pretty popular, of Matthew McConaughey, and he was at one of the awards, and people can look it up, but they had asked him, like, who does he look up to, or who does he aspire to be? And he says, I look up to me in 10 years, me in 20 years, 15, 20 years, because he said, I'm always trying to better myself, and I'll never be able to reach that perfectness, me in 20 years, because it always keeps going. The bar keeps being raised, and I kind of feel like that's kind of what you're saying. It's a great clip, by the way. For those, look up Matthew McConaughey and like, who does he look up to or aspire to be?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I heard this idea one time where it's like finding the right aim in life, knowing that you're never actually going to get there, and that as you move towards it, you're going to constantly be adjusting. So it's like the idea of trying to travel toward the North Star. Well, you can see where the North Star is, and then you put your head down and you start walking. But when you look up again, you might need to readjust the direction that you're headed.
Yeah. Your motivation is your family, your community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, that's something it's hard to find time for. That's the idea of balance. And that's another thing that's never 100% spot on dialed in, because sometimes you're spending a lot of time at work and maybe you're missing out on your family, so you readjust toward your family. Or in the past, I've signed up for too much. I was on at one time 3 or 4 different boards, local boards.
Oh, wow.
And I was spending too much time doing that.
Yes.
Not enough time focused on my family. Again, it's that idea of kind of tweaking things and adjusting things and trying to establish that balance.
It's that fine tuning, because you don't want to spread yourself too thin, or my father's known for at least telling me you don't want to burn the candle at both ends. Because then you kind of lose in the end, because you're not spending enough time here and there. So it's that fine tuning. I would definitely agree with that. I didn't want to skip this question. I kind of want to come back to it. At Long Brightbill Attorneys at Law, what really separates you from your competitors? I'll give you my input just from our conversation here. I would come to you, Fred, because I feel like you really do care, just from our talk here, and I feel like you would give it your all, put the client above making money, because you'd rather better them than have them come back and see you for the same thing.
No, that's that's accurate.
Yeah.
I think it can be hard to answer that question without coming off as being conceited or cocky, but I think you're spot on. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I was prioritizing money over quality and service. I don't think I really even have a choice in that way. I like the idea of putting in the work and creating a work product that people are happy with. Not only do I like it, I feel like I have a need, that's like a need for me. I have to be able to do that.
It's a drive. Yeah.
It's a drive. It's like, if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be able to be happy with the person that I am. And I genuinely want people to be happy with what I'm doing for them. I want to do a good job for people. At the end of the day, noting again that I'm not perfect. If I make a mistake on something, then I will own it and do everything that I can to make it right. Truth and accountability are really important things for me, and not only in my personal life, but also professionally.
Yeah, so I want to close out with the last couple questions here. for all the listeners, are there any other items you wanted to go over? I know we're going to, if it's all right with you, take some pictures of what we talked about earlier with.
Well, I do want to take a moment. We talked about this. I want to give a shout out to, so when we talk about community, the one organization that is still really close to my heart is the Lebanon Rescue Mission. It is a faith-based organization that provides services for underprivileged folks within our community. They have a men's shelter, they have short-term shelter, and then a long-term discipleship program that they offer. There is a women's shelter as well, the Agape Women's Shelter. They have a free medical clinic, and then they have a program for senior citizens, the Senior Mobile Pantry, where they deliver food to senior citizens in the community. I just want to give them a shout out. I've been on the board there since 2014, and that organization has given me way more than I have ever given to it, just spiritually, psychologically, seeing what they do for people in our community. And it's not the only organization that does those services, but they work closely with other organizations. So Lebanon County Christian Ministries,
Right, yeah, I was going to say.
Jubilee, they all work together to provide services for people who need them. And if you're interested in looking into that, to the organization more, their website's awesome. They have a really good social media presence.
I was just going to ask, how can people donate or get involved? What is the website, Lebanon Rescue Mission? If they just Google that, that'll probably
If they just Google that, that'll take them to the website. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. So before we close out, how can our listeners follow along on your journey and connect with Long Brightbill Attorneys at Law?
So we have a website, longbrightbill.com. The best way to get in touch with me is probably either email, which my email address is on our website, or Facebook. As of right now, that's probably the best social media outlet to access me. And one thing I don't want to get too far ahead because the plans are still in the work, but if you're interested in this, send me an email or send me a message on Facebook. I'm working with a team right now to develop a 12-month program where we would send out each month a short article and a video completely free for helpful tips for estate planning and things that hopefully people will find useful and helpful. Again, there's no cost to it. It's just an email newsletter. It's something that's been on my heart for a really long time, on my mind. I've been thinking about it. I've wanted to do it. I wanted to get this information out to people in a way that's like kind of, and I don't know, I have the content, but I don't have the creative solutions for getting it out there to people, like video and that sort of thing. So working with a team to help me do that is like, it's really exciting to me because it's the first step toward making that goal a reality. So that's probably going to start within the next 6 months or so. So if you're interested in that, then send me an email. We'll put you on the newsletter and get that information out to you.
Sounds like nothing to lose. I mean, and why not do it now instead of when that time does come and then you look back and you wish you would have done it.
Yeah. And even, and I'm not sending this out either. Like the goal is to get the information out to people. And if they have an attorney that they work with or a financial planner or whoever, then use those people. For me, it's really about the idea of preventing those situations from happening on the back end where planning wasn't done. Yeah. Because that is what really drives me, is to get people to a place where they don't have to worry about those things.
There you go. So, Fred, I know you'd mentioned you're doing dry January. Now it's the end of February. We're almost going into March. So would you do me the honors and, like your grandfather Ted would say, can we do just a sip of some whiskey to close it out? One finger? Okay, cool. So I got my Star Wars decanter here from my buddy Dylan. Shout out to Dylan. He's a listener. I'll just give a little sip, and I'll get mine, and we'll do a cheers and close this out.
So what kind of, is this bourbon?
No, it's Irish whiskey. It's Conor McGregor, the MMA fighter.
Oh, right,
Proper 12. So it's my next kind of favorite thing other than Old Forester. Let's close it out, and then we'll cheers.
All right.
Fred Long on the American Grown Podcast and the Colortech Creative Solutions Studios. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. This is awesome.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Fred, cheers. Thank you. Might have gave you a little bit more than...
No, that's awesome. I'm a sipper, I'm not a shooter.
Okay, perfect. That wraps it up. To see photos of today's guests and more content, just search American Grown Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review.
If you'd like to be a featured guest on the podcast, please direct message or email Austin at americangrownpod@gmail.com.